Hi, everyone, and welcome to our next episode on Hegel's Lectures of World History. Today, we'll be talking about, we're going to be beginning with the Oriental world, and that starts with China. We finally made it to China, Philip.
We finally made it out of the introduction, more about it.
Yeah, that was long. But now we're ready. We've got all the tools
ready
that we need.
We are ready for Hegel.
What's going on? Yeah. Before we start, maybe it's worth just saying something again that we said at the beginning of this lecture series regarding Hegel's treatment of other nations and other states. So there's a lot of work nowadays on how much Hegel got right about ancient China and what he got wrong. And they're actually, this edition of the lecture is actually excellent because there's a lovely analysis of Hegel's plausible sources. And I think it's just worth reminding our viewers that our aim is not to say that Hegel was right to show that China exemplifies this state of world history, or India or Persia or what have you. We're interested in clarifying the conceptual moments that Hegel identifies as being exemplified by China. Whether or not it actually exemplifies China, what we want to get at is what Hegel thinks is pertinent to the stage of world history.
Yeah.
So throughout, we're going to be taking Hegel at his word here. We're not going to be questioning what he says with respect to the historical content, because we're going to make use of it to express these conceptual moments. And that's really what we're focused on. But, we're not really committed to, saying that Hegel was right about, his analysis of this historical moment or that historical moment. We're just really using that as a prism through which to understand the finer conceptual details. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's, well, I'll just echo it in a different way. I think that's right, Ahilleas, that we're interested in conceptual structures, and the historical material and the factual accuracy of that is for us kind of a secondary thing, and we're not really going to occupy ourselves with that. We are, as you were putting it, interested in conceptual moments. So whether or not Hegel's idea of spirit at this stage maps onto China is not so important for us as, is this stage of spirit really coherent with how the rest of the historical views of spirit is going to develop, right? That's more what we are interested in. Thinking about nations in these terms historically, right? Is it kind of, doesn't cohere onto itself conceptually, philosophically? That's the more our target. Yeah.
Great. Okay, then. So shall we get stuck in then?
Yeah. Maybe one more thing is to remember that Hegel did not have the internet. Like for us, it's like air, right? It's we breathe it, right? And it's just like all the information is there. We can just Google Shijing and we get the information about it immediately. But for Hegel, he had to like crawl through a lot of reports by missionaries who went over there and compiled information, had to learn language and so forth. So it's an arduous task, and it's I think a testament to Hegel that he sort of took the time to dig into this stuff, right? We shouldn't expect anything less, but also that he did it as well as he could given his own time. Yeah,
definitely.
All right, let's get to it.
Okay, so somewhere I thought we might start is with the geography. And I don't have much to say about this, but I just thought it would be nice to tie together what Hegel says in the very first paragraph of the Oriental world with what we saw in the introductory section on geography.
Yeah.
So Hegel, there are two main things I think that are important here. One is the valley plains are the terrain of life here, not the mountain ranges and ravines. And yeah, so that's what I want to highlight. And then if we go back to page 199 of these lectures, Hegel connects valley plains with sources of fertility and maybe more importantly, rootedness. Maybe a certain static way of being, which he seems to focus on as being important for this first moment of world history, a sort of unchanging history.
Right.
The fertility, I don't really know what to do with that. I guess that's one reason to be rooted. It's great when everything's fertile around you. But the rootedness that a valley plain seems to offer might be important for the, it might be an important geographical component to explain why a state doesn't develop historically in the way that Hegel would want them to.
Yeah. It's also interesting to think how valleys are kind of enclosing shapes, right? So that it doesn't look so tempting to go other places when you see within where you are that you have what you need.
Yeah.
And so it's less tempting to move around. Whereas if you have big open plains and spaces, well, over here is just as good as over there, so let's just move around, right? People get very mobile. I'm sure Hegel will talk about that when we get to that point.
Yeah.
But he does emphasize, true to what he said in the introduction, that the geographical element, the influences.
Yeah. He doesn't say much of it, obviously, so you need to do a bit of the work for him.
Yeah.
But those are the connections that I found that I thought were most pertinent. And in terms of a conceptual moment, if we wanted to try and locate a conceptual structure for this, I would draw some kind of connection between rootedness and immediacy, and ahistorical historicity.
Okay.
But yeah, that's just my maybe I'm clutching at straws here.
Yeah. Well, what comes to my mind is that before the conceptual moment, what gives rise to the conceptual moment is first the practical moment. And the fact that the area, the geography, the nature is kind of amicable to human beings growing and flourishing there gives them more time to develop their social organization.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a reason why in this area people could organize together to form a state.
Right. Yeah, because you've got the natural resources to feed yourself. You don't have to constantly be thinking about how you're going to provide for the population, and that gives you the luxury of state formation, right?
And a big population that was.
And a big population as well. That's right. Yeah. Good. Yeah, that's another good point. Yeah. Good. Okay.
Anything else to add to that?
Specifically on geography, no.
I do want to raise something that is in this vicinity in the text.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised you didn't start with this, but Hegel begins not talking about geography, but about the dawn of spirit. And he links that up with the sun.
Yeah, that was too much for me.
That's too much for you. Yeah, well, never mind which direction spirit begins in, right? Ultimately, that is kind of whether it rises in the east or rises in the west, kind of inconsequential. But the fact that it rises somewhere and it's headed towards somewhere else, and I think the editors pick up on something in the notes, and when they talk about that, the sun setting somewhere isn't just a kind of sense of development, but also a sense of decay and downfall.
Right.
There's that at work too.
Yeah. So the idea that the more world history develops, there is also some decay going on.
Well, certainly in the cancellation, right? Not everything is preserved, because otherwise there wouldn't be development.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
So in the process of change, things are destroyed and things are created, and
institutions are left behind, right? Yeah. Things that no longer serve any purpose.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So the movement of the sun is like a representation of the development of spirit in world history.
It's a representation of that light itself is moving. I would think. Now, okay. This is just there's nothing conceptual, not very much conceptual going on here, but it's more of a kind of image or a representation we have with us. But the fact that light, if we think of that as something that lights up the world, shows us this truth, that itself is also moving. It's not static.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, that would have been a nice way to begin, actually.
Well, turns out too late. We have already begun. So you are more correct, Ahilleas.
Okay, then. So I'll just go on what I then thought was worth mentioning here, and it's kind of connected with the geography stuff and the rootedness stuff. So on the next page, on page 212, Hegel writes that China is self-contained and that it reached this level of culture quite apart from foreign ties. Its ties with other peoples are only recent and they are of no significance for this empire. And then he's a whole list of exaltations of how great the empire is of China.
Yeah.
And I thought this was, again, I saw it as related to this idea of rootedness, of the valley plains maybe, and maybe more to the point of what kind of conceptuality we're looking at. There's like a moment of immediacy here, of something that is almost just given, and it doesn't relate outwards in any obvious way. It seems to be entirely just itself.
Yeah.
And I thought, whenever we think about what a first moment in Hegel's philosophy would look like, it's a moment of immediacy. And this self-containedness of China seems to point at that as an aspect of that moment of immediacy. That's all.
Yeah, and that maps onto the sort of idea of the state in its infancy, right?
Yes, that's it.
Where subjectivity is fully immersed in substance. We don't distinguish between the two.
Right.
But nonetheless, we're still dealing with the state here, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise there wouldn't be any history, so to speak. So state in Hegel's broad sense, right? The conceptual sense.
Yeah, definitely.
I think go on.
No, please go.
Okay, well, so my take on the self-containment thing was he's highlighting this idea that, for a state to be minimally a state is not something that can be just put there from the outside, but has to be developed from within. So the people living in this area, they came together and they formed these institutions, this way of life, these patterns, these customs, and so on. It all coalesced into this multidimensional thing that became a state, and that started, started a memory of itself, started to keep records and histories and so on. But they managed to put it together in such a way that it was essential for them internally. It wasn't coming from the outside that you must do so and so according to the customs, the habits, and dictates from somebody else out there. Even though they might still relate to other states, other peoples, but that is not essential for their own initial formation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to highlight. And it's that self-sufficiency that sort of turned up to 11 in China. It's not only did they did they form the state through their own resources, but the state continued to develop entirely through its own resources. The impression is that it's unaffected by external events.
Yes, initially, we will see as it develops, it's gonna come up against some issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's key here is that, as Hegel puts it, laws are elaborated, right? People aren't just doing things unconsciously, but they reflect on what they do and they write it down. They keep a record. They figure out a rational way of keeping track of things and, you know, approving or rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior, right? All this stuff kind of coalesces and comes out, you know, together.
Yeah, all the stuff that we saw in the introduction, all the institutions that Hegel highlights as being important aspects of state are here. We have laws, we have the sciences, and we have history as well. We're going to get to that eventually, I assume. But as you've hinted at, the practice of keeping record of their own achievements.
Another thing that Hegel is kind of astonished by is that, as he writes, what is even more astonishing is that this people has a continuous, well-ordered and quite well-attested history from its earliest times onward. Right? So it's not just that they developed this history later on as the, you know, state developed later, but that it was something very early on that came onto the scene.
Yeah.
It's almost like right there with the immediacy.
Yeah, he is fascinated by how old it is and how they've managed to preserve their record this whole time.
Yeah, that's another thing, right? Not only do they start the record early on in the formation, but that it continues on for a very long time.
Yeah, yeah. So you're right, right? It is not like Greek and Roman history, but instead is more fully attested. No other land in the world has such a continuous, authenticated ancient history. And he also praises, or not, yeah, he's also impressed by the fact that the empire has remained autonomous with the exception of 2 conquests. Or maybe even despite the 2 conquests, his point is that even when it's conquered, it always retained its character. It always remained itself.
Yeah. On the surface, it looks like it's conquered by the outsider, but really it's the outsider that gets conquered by China.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Because it turns them into Chinese, right? They start adopting, you know, the customs and the behaviors, and oh yeah, this tax system is actually pretty good.
Right, and so Hegel writes, and so it is an empire untouched by history, for internally it developed undisturbed. It was not destroyed from without. No alien principle came to displace the ancient one.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a nice sort of interesting little paradox. It's
quite a paradox, yeah, not just a little one.
Right, yeah. So it's the beginning of world history. But as the beginning, it almost seems as if part of what it is for it to be the beginning of world history is that it remains untouched by history, as if it remains sort of crystallized as the moment of immediacy.
Yeah.
That you can sort of look at atemporally, and it will always be the same.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it's okay, it figured out very early on what it's going to be doing, and then it just kept doing that.
Yeah.
And so as long as it keeps doing that, well, it kind of is like a repetitious infinity, but it's not an infinity where it's anything really changes. There's a lot of change of management, right? That happens quite often. Splitting up of the kingdom into fragments and then coming together and then splitting up again, right? but it's also in the sense that, well, nothing really develops out of this. It's still sort of the same.
Yeah.
In its,
exactly.
you know, in the most fundamental sense.
Yeah.
And that's so strange how something that explicitly does, you know, do historical practice with the record keeping and all of that, implicitly does not have is untouched by history, as Hegel puts it.
Yeah, right. Because for Hegel, history is development, and it's not just change of management, as you said. It's not just what, you know, for regular historians, history is tracing who ruled when and what they did. But for Hegel, history is conceptual development. It's the movement from conceptual moments, and you don't get this in the Chinese Empire because, like you said, they figured out who they were at the beginning. They made that. I mean, well, I guess to be fair, they made the initial conceptual move. By stepping onto the stage of world history. And they were
then they just fell in love with it.
We've done it.
Well, I think this is we'll see is a common trait with all ancient nations and empires. They just find themselves in a certain way. It's like, yep, this is it, boys. This is pretty good. This is who we are. Full stop.
Is this not? Yeah, maybe. Is this not maybe even a feature of how everything is, though? Right.
Well, maybe with regards to modern states, we dwell less in the immediacy of things, or we regard the immediacy as immediacy and move on. But we will see. This is jumping ahead a little bit too much. It's really strange how this outward historical activity nonetheless is internally historically barren. What I was going to add is that you were saying, emphasizing the conceptual, you know, moments of this, but what I think is also pertinent for Hegel is the understanding we have of ourselves in history. So historical development is tied with the development of consciousness. You know, how we see ourselves, who we are as human beings, and so forth, right? This is the thing that really develops in history, and what I think for Hegel is the actual historical development.
Right. Okay. So the idea is, to go back to sort of the example, that the Chinese, they see themselves as fulfilled, as having culminated, and that's why there's no history within the empire.
There's no deeper history.
Yeah. In the Hegelian sense,
In the Hegelian sense.
Yeah.
So there's lots of external stuff happening, and I think this is going to betray a deeper development. But as Hegel lays it out here, we're still in the immediacy of things, so not so much.
Yeah. Okay. Then there's a very long paragraph about datings of the flood in the Old Testament and of Abraham, which
it's very important to bring that in there. Yes,
which I think can be confidently skipped without fearing any loss of substance. Unless you want to add anything.
No, I have nothing to add to that.
Okay, so then we get to the Shijing.
Indeed.
Which is, so how does Hegel put it? It's sort of the original book of the Chinese that contains its myths and sort of its origin story, as it were. What the Iliad is to the Greeks, the Shijing is to the Chinese.
Yeah, or Shijing, maybe, if you will look it up and
Shijing.
If you Google it, it's
it's an SHI.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in English, it's called the classic of poetry.
Right.
Simply translated variously as book of songs, book of odes, or simply known as the odes or poetry. oldest existing collection of Chinese poetry. And so, all right. So you can get the sense of why Hegel would think of this as the Chinese Iliad, or right, because it's kind of a foundational cultural literature.
Yeah, exactly.
So we see that not only is there, business with the terms of like the state and record keeping and bureaucracy and agriculture, harvest, etc. There's also culture arriving onto the scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
and, yeah.
I mean, as you've hinted many times already, Hegel makes a big deal that they spent a lot of time writing their deeds, their history.
Mm-hmm.
That they were people who were specifically given the task in court of writing history. And you can see why that in and of itself is important for Hegel, because if we cast our minds back to maybe the first or second episode, Hegel puts a lot of stock in this idea that a people sees itself as a people,
Mm-hmm.
as the bearers of certain deeds that are worth remembering. And so the fact that you've got this sort of this state institution of record keeping, of writing history, I think that is very important for Hegel. It sort of signals that we're looking at a people that is conscious of itself as being a people, and that sort of ticks one of the boxes when we're interested in world history and who to look at world history.
Yeah, that the state itself explicitly acknowledges that, hang on, we need to keep records. We need to keep, have historians, write things down. But we shouldn't also be forget that this is a more an act of self-glorification and in the interest of the ruler more than anything else, right? They take up this great heritage that's come before them, and now they will add a big piece to that heritage, right? And they will immortalize themselves in that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that this sort of self-interest and the passion that the individual rulers display with this isn't at odds with the historical conceptual development that Hegel's interested in.
Definitely,
Two things kind of are reciprocal.
Yeah. Let's not forget as well the episode on the divine idea and the passions. It doesn't matter if the intentions of the rulers were self-interest. What matters is that they express this reflection on the fact that they are this people and that they are worth remembering. Whether that's cashed out as self-interest or as altruistic historical writing is really neither here nor there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Indeed.
It's interesting also to look at the kinds of things that Hegel sort of points out as the content of the history, because he sort of says it's a. Oh no! Wait, I am. Oh no, it's still about the Shijing. Yeah, good. Because he stops talking about the Shijing for a bit, the Shijing, and then he starts talking about the Yijing.
Yeah, okay.
So, but we can park the Yijing to one side for now. Going back to the Shijing, on page 219, he makes the point that it has the form of single fragments, portrayals of singular elements, poetic romances without any historical sequence, lacking connections, and so it is not a proper book of history. So it's a book, it's a book whose contents is a series of anecdotes of who did what, who ordered what to do what, almost like a massive book of minutes in meetings.
Right.
And
well, it's poetry.
Sorry?
I don't know. Well, it's poetry.
But aside from the poetry, I mean, he says the contents consist, for instance, of a command of this or that ruler to someone by which he makes that person a minister.
Sure. Okay.
Or instruction given to a servant. or else involves reports, especially
Yeah.
reflections on military events.
Yeah. That might look like very bureaucratic on the surface, but probably there's nuggets of wisdom in that. Why did he, appoint this kind of person as a minister opposed to that person? Why did he issue this sort of command other than that? I think there's definitely more to it than the surface level stuff, as it usually is with poetry.
Yeah. And Hegel points out that there is a moral aspect to these works. So you sort of, I mean, I don't know anything about them, but it sounds as if they're meant to be instructive as well. Like you're meant to learn from what other people did. But I guess Hegel's point is that the historical dimension is incidental. That the reason for the sequence of event, the reason for the way the history is told is not to show it as a development of history, but to show it as a sequence of events.
Right.
Which have no internal connection with each other.
Right.
Maybe that's the point. There's no internal connection between the events.
Okay.
That ties them together.
Yeah.
They're just a bunch of events that happened one after another, sequentially, historically in that sense.
Yeah.
But with an inner logic.
Right.
And I wonder if this ties together with Hegel's point that the first state, the immediate state of world history, is the ahistorical state, paradoxically, and therefore also the way it views itself historically lacks the historical aspect.
Right. Yeah. So that it has like a sense of itself taking part in history, and at the same time not in the sense that, well, we're just meant to observe and learn these lessons because the lessons in and of themselves are good, and they're final, right? The truth is final, it's out there. We just need to, bring ourselves up to speed, and then things will be fine.
The truth is out there, yes.
Well, I mean, like, it's done, right? It's finalized. Yeah. It's like it's somebody sculpted it. It's written out there. It's done, right? We don't need to do any other, modification on the truth itself.
Yeah.
And this kind of can maybe betray a sort of one-sidedness in developing here. That if you do view the world in these sort of terms, then you are setting yourself up to a kind of historical stultification.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, on the other hand, I have to admit I haven't read the Shijing. I am interested in it now, given what Hegel has said about it and what I've briefly glanced at online. But if anyone out there knows more deeply about this text, then please let us know what Hegel thinks about it. Can you sort of, harmonize it with the factual material and the scholarly interpretations?
Yeah. So then there's also the Shijing, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, Philip.
Yeah, I see it now.
Yeah, on page 218. We introduced it earlier on, but he sort of talks about it in page 218. When he talks about these arrangements of lines, which I understand to be sort of is meant to be the inception of Chinese language, of the characters.
So others might know the I Ching as I Ching, which is a famous, we know it as, famous text full of wisdom, nuggets of wisdom, very abstract and also very poetical. I think I do have the I Ching somewhere.
Well, some live research going on.
Yeah. But yeah, you go on. I'll look for it later.
So, just to get to the conclusion, and then we can work backwards. But what's clearly important for Hegel is that he says that in the I Ching, where is it? You get the speculative philosophy of the Chinese.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's obviously, that should, our ears should prick up when we hear that. The Chinese have speculative philosophy. Wow, okay, so Hegel's recognizing something of his own philosophy in the I Ching.
Something of his own cohort.
Yeah.
His colleagues.
Exactly. Okay, so what is it? So he talks about these lines. So there's this legend where this man saw a dragon climbing out of a stream with a tablet that had these lines on it, and they had 3 straight lines, horizontal lines. And there was a second tablet with a straight line and a broken line beneath it. So like 2 dashes and so forth.
Yeah.
And apparently the straight line is the simple material from which all things are constituted, like substance, right? Like Spinoza substance.
Okay.
And the broken line is the distinction of this simplicity. So the Chinese have, on the one hand, a concept for sort of a universal substratum and a concept that sort of undermines this and says, okay, well, despite this universal substratum, there is difference in this universal simplicity. And that I think is the speculative moment that Hegel is discerning in the I Ching.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we should also always have been saying the ancient Chinese, right? Because Chinese is still very much still around today.
That's implied, yeah.
Yeah, but this is like the Chinese from 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. So yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of heavy duty metaphysics involved in that, and it's like substance and accidents, right? Those kind of classical dichotomy.
Exactly, substance and accidents, yeah.
Truth and error, right? Another way of looking at it. Appearance and essence.
So, as you said, there are these nuggets of gold in these texts that Hegel does recognize. And in this case, openly praise. His concern is that the other text, the Shijing, lacks a historical dimension, or that the historical dimension is not internal to the development of the events.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, keep them entertained. I'm just going to look for my I Ching.
Keep them entertained. All right. Well, let's go back to the I Ching, which I think is really fascinating to sort of focus on a bit. So he says, this is the wisdom of the ancient Chinese. This table is the foundation of the I Ching, consisting of nothing but meditation on these lines. These lines are utilized with a substructure of thoughts, such that by means of them, one thinks universal abstract characteristics. So we didn't really touch on this, but this is obviously also crucial for Hegel, the fact that the ancient Chinese sort of distilled the forms of thought into these abstract characteristics. So by expressing them as these 3 lines and this line and this broken line. Oh, excellent. The Book of Change. Great title.
Got it.
Excellent.
The Book of Change.
Yeah, excellent title. So I was just talking about how important it is for Hegel, I imagine, that the I Ching also expresses thoughts abstractly, as thought should be expressed, as he does in the Science of Logic, for example. So that's something else I think Hegel recognizes as important in ancient Chinese thinking. Philip, are you going to regale us with some golden nuggets?
I think so. but it's I haven't looked at this for many years now.
Let's start with the beginning. Start with the 3 straight lines.
Well, the way it begins, and let's see here. It starts out with the creative, and there's like no lines, they're just text. Well, actually, there's lines. And then the lines get broken up. Yeah, and there's, the lines have different shape for each chapter. Yeah. Well, it starts off with the creative. Great success befits the upright and true. Vast indeed is the scope of the greatness of the creative basis. All things and all beings originate from it. And so it sums up the totality of nature. Like clouds raining.
3 lines. Is this the 3 lines? The totality of nature? No.
Well, it's kind of like, let's see here. Let's.
Oh, I see. Okay.
There's like text, basically, right? The only thing is about lines is up there. This pattern changes from chapter to chapter. So you see here, it's broken up into 2 sets of lines.
Yeah. That's the receptive. Okay.
Yeah. And then, of course, next time is difficulty. Because what cookie, how did they, you get both things there.
Well, you got a bit of mediation there, right? You got a bit of the straight lines, a bit of the broken lines, sublative.
Yeah, but this is mirrored oppositely in the next one. How they are different in innocence.
All right.
And so on it goes.
So it's got nothing to do with language, actually. It's just abstract representation of a thought.
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I was wrong when I said that.
Yeah. The action of nature is powerful. Cultured people use it to strengthen themselves ceaselessly. And
it's
there's
interesting.
A whole bunch of things,
I just want to focus a bit more on this idea that they're abstract characteristics that Hegel seems to like. He writes light, fire, and the like. They thought of in different arrangements among these lines. And I'm thinking of the difference between this and, let's say, Heraclitus, who thinks that the fundamental principle is fire because everything is change. Heraclitus is locating the fundamental principle in something material, in fire. Whereas what Hegel likes about what's being done here is the abstraction from light, fire, from materiality into something more simple, something more abstract, these lines.
Yeah, it's abstract, but it's also more concrete at the same time, because there's appears to be a lot of practical advice, built into this. So since we're speaking about fire, shall I read a little bit about fire?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so this is chapter 30. Fire. Fire is beneficial for the success of the upright. It is good luck to raise a female ox. You see? That you didn't know. Fire is clinging. Sun and moon cling to the sky. Plants cling to the earth. Clinging is what is right with double illumination. Clinging to what is right with double illumination develops the world. Flexibility gets through successfully by clinging to balance and rectitude. This is represented by it being lucky to raise a female ox. Illumination doubled makes fire. Thus do great people shine on the 4 quarters with continued light. And then a whole bunch of stuff about yin and yang and the components. But I think that's beyond us. We've actually studied this thing.
It's interesting that they identify fire with clinging.
Yeah, clinging.
Which is something more static, more stable than someone like Heraclitus identified fire.
No, I think clinging is very dynamic, right? You cling to something, so like you hold on to it.
I don't know, maybe it's a bad translation, but when you say something clings to something, it's, yeah, exactly. You're not letting go of it.
Yeah, but you're just still actively trying to hold on to it.
Yeah.
If you were just there, you wouldn't need to cling to it.
But there's a certain element of stasis in clinging. Like if you're
That
clinging
is
onto
dynamically
something,
body about, yeah.
yeah, maybe. Okay, maybe
It's
that's the
trying to
space.
be static, but
Yeah.
it's still trying, and so it's dynamic.
Okay, but then okay, that's quite speculative, then, isn't it?
Well, we are both in the speculative territory here.
Well, whereas Heraclitus, maybe I'm wrong here, it's just about change. Fire is just about movement. There isn't that moment of stasis with fire.
Yeah, although here they enrich it with not just clinging, but that the clinging itself, you cling in a certain way, and that brings about what's called double illumination, which then develops the world. So it's a pretty fundamental thing, and it's taking place on a total level. And then you get illumination doubled makes fire. Yeah, they seem to put it. Yeah, so you get to be flexible when you cling to balance and rectitude, which is a very paradoxical thing, right?
Yeah.
You get to be flexible, but it's not that different from our sort of moral compass, where being rational and following the universal categorical imperative gives you greater freedom than if you were just to follow your own immediate givens and inclinations.
Yeah. It's actually very Hegelian, isn't it?
Indeed.
Well, I can see why he found the speculative philosophy in this text. I wonder if he talks about it in History of Philosophy lectures.
Well, that will have to be a discussion for another series.
Yeah.
We need to wrap up this one first.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay, so I actually I don't have anything else to say on this section.
No, me neither. So we have I think we've slated like 4 episodes to cover what Hegel has to say about China, and we discussed today the first bits, and then next time we will see what Hegel has to say about the main elements in Chinese history. So he's going to say more about this and develop it. Yeah.
So today we touched on the geography, sort of the moment of immediacy that China seems to represent, the ahistorical, world historical situation that it finds itself in, and these 2 main texts, the Shijing and the I Ching, that are expressions of their history and of their speculative thought.
Yeah, which for Hegel must have rejoiced, when he discovered this.
Must be like, finally.
Well, finally, it's like just right there out of the door. This is the first thing he picks up on. It's like, we got philosophy already.
5,000 years ago, we had it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, well, and that may be another thing to think about, right? Well, can you have a state without philosophy, right? Properly state in a full Hegelian sense.
Yeah.
Not just a war band.
Well, you wouldn't reach the pinnacle of absolute spirit, so I don't know. Yeah.
But this is all also giving us clues as to what is the actual development in history, right? Because if all the elements are kind of at work, in place at the earliest form of statehood, right? Well, how could we possibly develop unless we need to change our idea of development itself, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good thing to focus on, actually. What exactly is being developed? Because as you correctly said, I mean, we have philosophy, speculative philosophy here at the beginning. So why don't we have the final element of the state?
Yeah, why don't we just have history here, right?
Yeah.
In the full sense. Hegel doesn't seem to think so. I think there's a development that is only just beginning. Okay, well, what is that?
Yeah.
If it's not this.
I wonder if it's the historical aspect that's the most important criterion here. The fact that the first moment, ancient China, is meant to be ahistorical in its development. I wonder if that's the most important thing for why it's the first moment.
So why Hegel puts it as the first moment in his account?
Yeah,
it's because it exemplifies this immediacy the most.
I wonder if it's that. Yeah, I wonder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that would make sense in Hegel's systematic program, right?
Yeah, and within the frame of world history.
Yeah.
That history and historicity in the Hegelian sort of sense of it is the criterion that we need to keep an eye out
right
for. And whether they have speculative philosophy or not isn't as important for the development of world history. Maybe it's an interesting expression of the state, but it'll be interesting to see what factors play a role in the movement from China to India, for example.
Yeah.
To see what Hegel focuses on.
Yeah, that would be interesting to look at. I don't know. I think that the role of philosophy does play some important part, and it is an indication of the deepening of a state, right? Mm-hmm. And the self-understanding that a people has. But when we were just reading the I Ching, right, there's a sense that the answers are there, they're ready.
Yeah.
There isn't any development of the answers themselves. We just need to figure out the right access to it, and then we're good. Or we need to prepare ourselves in the proper way and adopt it, and then we're good.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to read more about this as we go along.
Yeah.
But I wonder, I mean, here you have the very beginning, a very speculative expression of philosophy, thumbs up, and yet you have an ahistorical, a state without history. And that seems to be an interesting dissonance.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what to make of it. Are they intentional with each other? If they are intentional, that suggests that sort of.
Well, it's the same issue that plagues in old classical metaphysics with the idea of substance and accidents. If substance is like perfect, why are there accidents in the first place? It seems like the two things are at odds with one another.
Yeah.
Right. If they are, so either you have to say like substance somehow degenerates into accidents, but how can substance degenerate? It's substance, right? How can it transform? It cannot transform. It's substance. Only accidents transform and change and are in flux. So I think it's a logical issue that is here expressed in in historical representation in historical terms, because there is a certain worldview that just is and is untouched, and then there's the people themselves who are kind of accidents and they just change and so on and so forth. But the goal for them is to become more like the background, because the background is already set.
Yeah.
So I wonder if this is going to be the identifying factor between all ancient states, is that they have this kind of ultimately static worldview. That it's all the truth is out there, it's ready made. We just need to adapt to it.
Yeah. Let's see. It'd be good to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
And just to echo Philip's invitation, anyone who has any knowledge of this stuff and who thinks maybe Hegel has missed something or Hegel is right about something, leave a comment. It would be great to know what you think, and we will definitely discuss it. in the next episode.
Indeed, yes. And do join us, read along, right? We're reading along bit by bit. So we're not
At
going
a very
fast
leisurely pace.
Yeah, we're going very, very gentlemanly and ladylike.
Exactly. Okay, then. So I guess that's all from us.
That's all for us from this time. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed.
Yeah, bye-bye.